You're listening to The Tarot Diagnosis. I'm your host, Shannon. I'm a licensed psychotherapist, and I also happen to have a love for tarot. Each episode, I invite you to reflect with me as I work to demystify the tarot and the human experience, all while exploring tarot's connection to mental and emotional health. While this podcast may feel therapeutic, it is not meant to take the place of psychotherapy. So grab your cards and join me as I work to create a pathway to better understand ourselves and those around us. Today, I get to have a vulnerable and meaningful discussion with a fellow therapist, Cami Ostman, and we find ourselves stepping deeply into the world of tarot and internal family systems. Cami has since transitioned from practicing psychotherapy to a different form of healing, writing and teaching. Cami is the director of the Narrative Project, where she and her coaches support writers through her signature 7 stages from would-be writers to published authors. Hi, Cami.
Hi, Shannon.
So I'm so excited to talk to you today. We had a conversation not too long ago, and I was just so interested in your life journey because you were a practicing therapist. You use tarot. You enjoy internal family systems work. And on top of all that, you just seem like an adventurous person, and you're this literal storyteller. So you're all the things that I find very exciting.
I know. And it was so fun to talk to you because I've been listening to your podcast. And when you got into talking about internal family systems, I was like, oh, here we go. So it's pretty exciting to be here.
Yeah. And I love that you also have that experience of, working with clients. And then you also have this tarot experience, which is exciting because a part of your journey that was super intriguing to me included this transition of having, this, what sounded like more of a strict religious background where maybe tarot would have been prohibited.
Yeah.
But you've since come to embrace tarot, which I think is really great. And I'm always fascinated by experiences of people, coming into this world from, more of a religious perspective. And I would love to open the conversation by hearing about that journey and how tarot even came to be a part of your life.
Yeah. So thank you. This is such an interesting thing for me to talk about. Because, I like to say in some ways I have more faith now than ever before, even though I'm not religious anymore, Right. And so the way that I even came into religion was because I came from, like all good therapists do, a pretty messy family,
Yes.
And the church really scooped me up and took me in, and they were really good people. I am not one of those people who eventually left my faith because, the people in the church were jerks or hypocrites. Not at all. No, I have nothing but good things to say about the human beings who scooped me in. And so that faith was not a family faith. It was my own journey. And because the people in that community were so loving and good to me, I was really, really open to the doctrines that I was being taught. And when I finally just, needed to move away from the really specific religious doctrines, there was definitely kind of a hole for me in terms of my inner life. So basically, if I were to back up a little bit, inside the faith, because it was a pretty fundamentalist faith, tarot was forbidden. I mean, it was like there was any kind of divination or anything that was considered like tapping into some otherworldly power, and tarot was thought to do that, which is not really what I think about tarot now, but was considered to be evil or frightening or, scary, potentially dangerous in some way. And so we were taught, not to touch them. That was the thing that I was taught. And then when I realized that I needed to move away from the doctrines, I had this practice for years. I mean, like 20 years, where I would get up in the morning and I would read the scriptures, the sacred text, and then I would meditate and pray. Well, I didn't stop doing that just because I needed to unpack and leave behind the doctrines, some of the doctrines. And instead, though, I needed to fill it with some other way of what I now know. What I believe I was doing was really tapping into my deep intuition. Yeah. So I had this practice of really being in the deep every morning. And so I really needed some way to continue to do that. And I wandered into the East West bookstore here in Seattle where I live, and I found this deck called the Tarot of Transformation. I don't know if you know that deck. It's not a classic Rider-Waite sort of. It's these beautiful feminine images. And then the book is full of meditations, the book that comes along with it. So that's how I got started in it, was really how to, a need to engage that morning practice in a new way. So that was the beginning.
What a fascinating story. But I'm mostly curious about what prompted you to walk into the store. It seemed like you had some sort of longing or desire to have that ritual, that practice that allowed you to feel that sense of groundedness, centeredness. Did you have any experience beforehand or knowledge of tarot that was like, oh, I know that this thing might provide me the same sense of comfort and intuitive experience that I got before? Or was it something where you were like, I don't know, I don't have an answer, I just ended up there?
Yeah, no, I mean, I didn't have any experience with tarot. I knew that I wasn't supposed to touch it early on. And then when I decided that I was just curious, and I spent a lot of time during that period of my life in the East West bookstore, sort of like trying to, there was this absence for me when I left my church beliefs, right? I can't say I left the church people because most of them have graciously stayed in connection with me.
Oh,
but
that's amazing.
Yeah. And so, but I did need to recraft a life philosophy. You know what I mean? Like, I just didn't have one. And this is actually right around the same time that I went to graduate school. So I was working on, a new kind of way of thinking as I was becoming a therapist. So I was just really, really open to, what's out there. And I absolutely stumbled upon the tarot deck. And it's well worn. I mean, if you saw it, it's like the box is duct taped together.
Aww,
it's like,
I love that. So you actually discovered and began your tarot practice before you became a therapist.
Kind of simultaneously, like we were maybe just starting the internship, and so I wasn't a full-fledged therapist yet. I was, heavily supervised and really just learning the theories. My background is as a family systems therapist, and so we learned all of in my program, we learned all of the family systems theories, and then we had to choose one to focus on. And I focused on narrative therapy because story is so important to me. But I tracked with internal family systems carefully, like collected all the books that all of the people who were majoring in that read so that I could read them later. Because I was simultaneously fascinated by both theories.
It makes so much sense hearing your journey that you would gravitate towards tarot, because here you are in this field that is heavily focused on systems, family systems, and then you choose a focus where you're focusing on narrative therapy, storytelling. And if we look at tarot, it is a system of storytelling.
Exactly.
So that's fascinating to see a pattern in stuff that you were drawn to, stuff that has, significant meaning to you, just like inherently as a human.
Right. Yeah. And I guess I would also back up and say that one of the, when I used the Bible as my anchor for my meditation, it was always the story that I would meditate on. I would read a story, and then I would ask, the numinous, is maybe what I would call it now. What is here for me? What do I need to know for today? So I was already really kind of practicing that way,
Right.
which is how I tend to use the tarot now in the mornings.
I was just going to say, I mean, that sounds like someone's tarot practice, right?
Yeah,
like,
totally.
What do I need to focus on today?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I appreciate you being so vulnerable and sharing, that part of your journey, because I think I think a lot of folks could probably relate to it. And, I think a lot of folks who come from a religious background and find themselves, within the realm of tarot do find that sense of ritualistic comfort. And, I've been spending so much time lately reflecting on just ritual in general, and just doing a lot of research on the psychology of ritual and, why we tend to find things in our life that create that for us. And I just, keep coming back to it provides a sense of comfort and predictability amidst, chaos or feeling lost or just unstable. And, I think that also aligns with your journey where you, left this, pretty regimented community. And then we're probably like, oh, but there are so many aspects of that I miss. So then finding something that fit that kind of that hole for you was really important. And again, it's a ritual. So I just keep going back to, like, at least in my personal life, how important ritual is, and whether it's secular or religious or spiritual or just a walk around your block.
Right. I mean, what you're saying is like there's an anchor or container. I mean, I'm not sure what metaphor you'd go with, right? But there's definitely something there that holds the flow of the river in ritual. Yeah,
absolutely.
I love that. Yeah, I love that.
So speaking of ritual and tarot, do you want to pull a card with me?
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool.
Okay.
So are you using your, was it the Transformation Tarot? What was it called?
The Tarot of Transformation. I'm not, actually. I'm using this fun deck. I'm sure you know it, the Modern Witch Tarot deck. Do you know that one?
Yes, I love that deck.
I do too. It's so quirky and fun.
So I'm using Tarot Vintage, just as usual, because it's just I don't know, it's become an extension of me. So I don't typically pull to a question all the time. I figure, especially for the episode, I just like to see what comes out and where it guides us. So if you're comfortable with that, let's just pull.
I'm good. Yeah, I got a fun one.
Oh, what'd you get?
I got the 8 of Wands.
8 of Wands. Oh, okay. I love the 8 of Wands. Oh,
I love it too. What did you get?
All right. Oh, 10 of Pentacles.
Oh, interesting.
So I don't pull 10 of Pentacles that often. I feel like I pull 8 of Wands pretty often now.
Yeah.
But what are you thinking about 8 of Wands?
Well, I mean, what's fun about this one, this version of it, is it's got the wands, going in all in the same direction, and then it's got this motorcycle rider underneath it, like she's riding away like a bat out of hell, And so what I love about it is sort of like this directionality, like we're going somewhere, And the wands, I always think of the wands as magic for because they're wands,
right?
So somehow we're magically going somewhere is kind of what comes to my mind.
I love that. And it's one of my favorite depictions of the 8 of Wands because, you really feel this sense of like determination and both like just knowing, like I know where I'm headed, or maybe knowing that I don't absolutely have a destination in mind, but I just know that I'm going somewhere.
Right.
And there's a sense of comfort and excitement.
Adventure. Yeah, I love that.
The 10 of Pentacles, the 10 of Pentacles and the 8 of Wands, I actually like these together. I think so. With the 10 of Pentacles, they're actually very different, but I tend to view this card as more of like the ancestry card. There's a lot of heavy family symbolism in there, which, you as a family systems therapist probably really relate to. But, and I'm curious to hear your perspective on this too. But, I look at the 10 of Pentacles and I think that it's also like pretty heavy on self-inquiry because, we're forced to really look at this and ask ourselves maybe like what stories from my lineage or my family history am I embracing? What stories am I leaving behind? What parts of myself stem from the learned behavior from these interactions and these people I was raised around. What relationships have healed me or harmed me? And it can be an overwhelming card, much like the Eight of Wands, actually. A lot of people
I just pulled it out. It is. It's got a lot going on.
Yeah, there's a lot of, there's just a lot happening, I think, in both cards, but in a different way. Like Eight of Wands is very, fast-paced movement. And the Ten of Pentacles, there's a lot of, what word do I want to use? Almost like when you're at a family gathering and there's not a lot of urgency, but there's just a lot of stimulus. And
it's almost
so there's
like
still a lot happening.
On the one that the version that I have in my hand, it's got this man and this woman, talking to each other, and she's holding a baby, and then the pentacles are all around. And what came up for me is like in this kind of like the pentacles are the parts of the self. Yes. They're present with inside this conversation. Like, there's more, in other words, there's more here in the room than just you and me,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Because especially if we look at this as like that self-reflection, self-inquiry, like invitation, we could absolutely apply it to internal family systems. That both of these cards really tend to lend themselves nicely to that because, the Eight of Wands asking, okay, where are you going to go with all these parts? And there is I think a strong bond between, tarot and psychotherapy and just internal family systems in general.
Absolutely. I mean, I could just riff on what you just said, like all day long. That's like, if you look at the Eight of Wands and you see the character moving in the direction, if you think of the wands as parts of the self, it's like, are you self-led, like, Jay Early's book in self-therapy, I think it's called Self-Therapy, right? Where he talks about like that self-leadership, are you led by the core, or, are the parts leading? I think
absolutely
that asks that question.
Gosh. Yeah. So if we set the Eight of Wands next to that Ten of Pentacles, that goes back to what I was saying earlier. Like, what stories are we taking with us? What parts of us are because of these relationships that we've had? What's learned behavior? What's not?
Right.
And I think actually, and I really wanted to talk to you about this, someone who's, so systems based and internal family systems based, this integration of tarot and IFS, because I feel like I have my own personal experience with it and my, psychological experience with it. But how do you see these two blend together or integrate? How have they shown up in your own maybe personal therapeutic practice or your practice with clients?
Right. So what's really interesting is that it didn't dawn on me for a long time that the cards could represent the parts. And the way that I sort of figured that out for myself was that now, as you said, I'm no longer doing therapy. I now run a writing program helping writers get their books done, but I do this whole piece on the inner critic, and it's all based on the IFS, right?
Right.
And so I teach everybody, about the manager parts and the exiled parts and the core self, and, and how those manager parts are not going to want you to engage in your creativity sometimes because their whole job is to protect you from the perceived danger, and so I was doing my morning tarot one day, and and I don't remember which card I pulled. It was probably one of the court cards, because those images are so sort of like powerful.
Absolutely.
And I was like, oh, like that's my inner bitch, and and I realized, oh my gosh, I mean, I can absolutely, when I'm doing parts work, because I do that in the morning as part of my journaling often, if there's anything up, when I'm doing parts work, I can bring the tarot in, as a way of asking, like, well, what part am I engaging in here with this anxiety, or what element of the core self, like you talked about the C's, the calmness, the curiosity. I can't remember there's 8 of them, right?
Yeah. I always do. I get to like 6 and then I'm like, shoot, what are the last 2?
I know. Isn't that funny? I do that with John Gottman's 4 Horsemen too. Yes. I'm like, what the heck is the 4th one?
Yeah. There's always that 1 or 2 that you forget.
Yeah. but yeah, so that's sort of how I discovered it. And so now when I'm doing my parts work in my journal, I used to sort of keep those two rituals separate, but now I bring them together and I'm like, okay, well, which part am I working with here? Which part am I bringing inquiry to? And sometimes I'll use the cards also just to help me generate the question. What is it that this part wants to be asked? So and I'll just draw. Yeah.
I love that. What does this part want to be asked? And it's so funny hearing your experience with the court cards, because that was very much mine with my manager part, and using tarot to help identify. The Queen of Swords is my ultimate manager. Oh, right.
Is that so funny?
Right. She exists all the time. She is there. I'm well aware of her. And, using tarot and really understanding, for example, the Queen of Swords archetype really helped me understand how my manager part shows up and how I can identify, when am I being too rigid? When can I let her set her sword down?
Right.
And having that imagery has been, really powerful in helping me cope and just regulate my own emotions and my own experiences, where, I think without that imagery, you can still get there. It's just a little bit more difficult. And what's funny too is IFS has their own kind of tarot adjacent cards. They're called the interactive cards.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, that's funny.
I think it's a set of maybe 40 or 50 cards. I forget how many are in there, but they very much have, different archetypes. There's one in there that just screams Queen of Pentacles.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's
but
funny.
They just look like a tarot deck.
Yeah. Okay. I didn't know that. It's funny because before I even knew the tarot, I had this part, this image that I was working with just in my own personal IFS work. So as I said, first I had the tarot of transformation, and it was a long, long time before I got a classic tarot deck and really saw the images that most people think of as tarot. And so I had, though, this part, more of an exiled part, that I called the sword bearer. And she was very specific sort of image that I was working with in my journaling. And then finally one day I went and got one of the classic tarot decks, and I saw all the swords, and I was like, whoa. And the Nine of Swords was, it's this burden of the sword, really hit me hard. And for a long time, I did meditation on that Nine of Swords. What are the burdens I'm carrying here? What do each of these swords represent that I've got my head in my hands, with? So I love that.
I think a lot of tarot readers can certainly relate to having that experience where you pull a card and it almost, you have this visceral reaction, and that card just sits with you for a while. And, maybe it follows you around, you end up pulling it a lot, or you choose to set it out, and maybe it's in front of your computer all the time and you're continuing to do work, which I think is another, just such powerful component of how therapeutic tarot can be, and the stories that it creates and then helps us discover in ourselves that we're already there to begin with.
Right.
Which I think is probably why you tend to use them also, in your now business as someone who helps people tell their stories.
Right.
Because they're just, overflowing with possibility. You and I could look at, the Queen of Swords, for example, and probably, understand what that card means, its traditional interpretation, but then have two very different experiences or stories to tell about the card.
Yeah, that's right. Because it would evoke a different part for each of us,
Absolutely.
or a different energy, if not a full blown, fully developed part. And, as a writer and a person who works with imagination, I really see the parts as I have written stories about my parts.
Yeah.
They have I have a full relationship with some of them that kind of goes on for years. It has a story arc,
That reminds me of when we were talking, I don't know, a week or so ago, and we were talking about how we get to this point in our life where we are like, okay, we have spent all this time trying to figure out what we want to do in the world and how we want to exist in the world and how we now want to exist within ourselves. So I just cut the deck and pulled 10 of Cups, and it's interesting, another 10. So I'm like, ooh, this is fascinating. But, you know, it makes me think about, again, the different versions of ourselves, because you're talking about how, you know, you have created, you know, narratives and stories fully based on like these different parts that you have.
Right.
And so I have a like non-traditional approach to this 10 of Cups card, and I feel like you'll appreciate it just based on your experience.
I can't wait to hear. Yeah.
You know, when you look at this card, you have the two folks in the foreground who I feel like could be, you know, they're waving goodbye to these like smaller humans, you know, these children, and it's almost like waving goodbye to maybe a younger version of the self, whether that's actual like numerical younger version or just a version of yourself that you're like, okay, like this part isn't at the forefront of my life anymore. And then I always view the cups positioned in the rainbow as almost like begging to be read as these different versions of ourselves, or if you want to go the numerical route, like the decades of life. But I feel like it's also being able to look at, you know, all the parts that we've embodied throughout this life journey and really being able to reflect on them and say, you know, which ones, you know, am I grateful for? Which ones have I done so much work with? Which ones do I not need anymore? Which ones still exist?
Oh, I love that. I just pulled the card out so I could look at it. I love that interpretation. It sort of hits on what we talked about last week. You know, when I look at it, I'm almost like there in every cup is a dream, you know, or an aspect of the self, a thing that you've wanted to do or accomplish or live out. And there they all are, you know. That is just really, I love that.
You know, and it's interesting because, you know, we were talking about kind of like once you've hit that midlife point, which, you know, I've been thinking about this a lot lately. And I think it's a lot earlier than most of us realize. I feel like we tend to say it's 50, but really it's technically, you know, 40 to 60 is, you know, I think what we say. But, you know, I think this time of life is where we start to make that transition from, you know, maybe craving that external validation to finding comfort and solace in our own company and finding comfort in our true self, you know, and that true self is another huge component of IFS. But, you know, there's, you know, looking at this 10 of Cups, there's also this moment of pause where we look at, you know, what we've already done in the world and what our place in the world has been. And I feel like that comes with both a celebratory nature, because the 10 of Cups is, you know, pretty celebratory and tends, you know, representing culmination. But, you know, there's also a sense of almost grief, and going back to your 8 of Wands too, this, well, now what the hell do I do?
I know. Yeah. I mean, it's like, I was looking at the 10 of Cups and I'm like, okay, so there they are celebrating. And then I was thinking, and then what? You know, I mean, what happens after this? It's funny because you do, I think, get to a point where, not everyone, of course, gets to a point where they have fulfilled what they set out to fulfill.
Right.
But you do move through your life and accomplish certain things, or you let certain dreams go, or, you know, you raise your kids and they're out of the house. Basically, you move into another part of the life cycle, and you're asking yourself, what's next, you know, or maybe you've done the work. This, I think, therapeutically also, you can think of it as like, okay, you know, I've spent the better part of my 20s and 30s doing the work. And once the parts are a little bit settled down and you're in your core self, now what, you know? And I mean, this really hit me hard, really in the last year, because I had my business up and running, and which I had always been very curious, you know, can I really make a thriving business? Can I make a go of it? And here it is, and it's thriving and it's beautiful. And I have a team of people. And then I had this piece of property that my grandparents used to own. And I purchased it from my aunt, and I was like, you know what? I've wanted to be on this piece of property for a couple decades. I'd asked my grandparents if they'd sell it to me, and they were like, we're not ready. And then they passed away, and my aunt had it. And so I still pined after it. So I approached her, and she's like, yes, I will sell it to you. And I wanted to put a yurt on it. So I galvanized my brothers are all builders.
Nice.
So I galvanized all the dudes in my life, and some of my girlfriends too, and dragged them out there, and we built this yurt, and it's just gorgeous, and it looks out at the mountains. So there it is. And it was sort of the final big thing. Wow. And I went out one week with my computer thinking, I'm going to go out there and write, and do the thing I've always imagined doing here. And Shannon, I am not kidding you. That mountain would not let me work. Oh. And fortunately, I had thought to bring, because I'd been meaning to do this, a whole bunch of my journals from my early life. And I just sat out there at that yurt and read my old journals and cried my eyes out.
I have chills.
And just asked, well, now what? And so the whole summer, I couldn't work. I was drawn out there. I would get up in the morning thinking I was going to do some work in Seattle and be like, no, I'm going to take it out to the yurt. And nope, not working. That yurt was like, nope, you're going to sit here and give yourself a good think until you come up with a new version of what's next,
Oh my
It's just really weird.
What about oh my gosh, the ultimate 10 of Cups moment for you?
Right.
I mean, I'm picturing you being so eager to get out to this property that, and I love to use the word pining, that you were pining after for decades. You finally get there and you have this vision of what it's going to be. And the world, and like you said, the mountain had another story planned for you. You're going to sit here and just wave. You are going to reflect on these younger versions of yourself, and
that's what you're going to do.
Sit. Wow, how powerful!
I know. Well, I mean, and I think, and then you and I talked about this, and you talked about it in another episode. That there comes a point where you have to reevaluate. And I think we just do. There's some sort of natural places where, you might be called to do that, right after high school, right after college, maybe sometime in the early part of the family life when the kids go off, I don't have children. So some of those kind of natural family points,
right.
But I guess the self just makes it happen when it needs to happen.
Yeah, I really like the way you're talking about that. And yes, I mean, I'm child free. I won't be able to have children in the future. So I definitely often reflect on, my life won't fit in this traditional 10 of Cups trajectory, right? So that's why when I look at this card, I don't see myself in a traditional sense in that card, because that's not the life or the experience I will have. So I try to make it my own. But, it's interesting hearing your experience and just, reflecting on my own. I'm thinking too, it's almost like you went to that yurt, you had that moment, right? Where you're like, okay, this process is continuing. I had wanted this for so long. I made it happen. And I feel like that was a reflection on, if we're talking about the first part of our life where we're kind of really eagerly consuming knowledge, and we're, establishing a career, or, you had talked about checking these things off your bucket list, and, we're forming romantic and platonic relationships, and really trying to figure out what it means for us to be quote unquote successful, or
who we're going to be.
Accomplished. And I think a lot of this journey ends up causing our identities to almost when you use the word pathological, pathologically entwined with these quote unquote markers of success or markers of accomplishment. And it almost seems like you brought that energy to the yurt with you. And that almost divine experience of the mountain was that's done. That version of success and to do is done.
Yeah. Yes. I love what you're saying. It's like we spend the early part of our lives trying to figure out who we're going to be. And then we be that thing. And then what? It's such a strange, the soul calling forward, something. And we don't know what it is because it doesn't fit into any of the socially constructed storylines, to kind of use a narrative therapy idea. Those storylines are all, by necessity, they're all socially constructed because they have to be, because we're little children when we're being socialized, But then there is a point where that it may not be satisfying, and we need to ask, what else is there?
So it reminds me of so I pulled a couple cards to guide the episode. I pulled 3. 2 I haven't talked about.
Okay.
Or actually, no, I haven't talked about this third one either. But they were Page of Swords, 6 of Swords, and the Magician. But what you're talking about right now really makes me think of this 6 of Swords. Because there's almost this inherent grief that exists within this card, but you're also bringing stuff with you. Like, you haven't fully let go of, either who you were or what you wanted, but you are going somewhere else.
Right.
And there's a sense of like fear that can exist there too. Like, I don't quite know where I'm going or where I'm supposed to be. And I feel like there's so much, what's the word I'm looking for? Almost like an itinerary for what we're supposed to be doing in life until we get to this certain point. We're talking about like that kind of midlife journey.
Yeah.
And then, traditionally, folks who tend to have children and then have grandchildren, the itinerary continues because it goes back to that 10 of Pentacles, right? Like, oh, you sit and watch your lineage grow and the role that you play. But if you don't fit into that traditional narrative, this 6 of Swords can almost be like, well, shit, not only now what, but now where?
Right. I love what you're saying there, because I think even people who do follow the traditional trajectory, and this as a therapist, I am sure you have had people in your office confess that they're on the trajectory and they wish they weren't.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. And that's a crisis. That's a different kind of crisis, because you're on it. But yes, where are we going? And I'm not going to lie, like sitting out at the yurt, I was in crisis. I mean, and I was just out there with my tarot deck, like pulling, and, so I would pull like the 6 of Swords. Then it would be like, okay, so you're leaving someplace and you're going someplace. Very helpful. What's next? But where, you want a specific answer. You're pulling card after card, but where? I mean, is it a trip to South America, or like, which ocean is this?
Which you'll be doing soon. I wonder if that will provide you answers.
I think it will. Yeah, it always does. There's something about, this 6 of Swords really it sort of has and the 8 of Wands too, they both have this, you're moving, they're different kind of moving energies, but I always feel, maybe you feel this too, but I think a lot of people do, when you're in an airport, and you sit down next to somebody, I always think like, I'm going to tell them that I'm somebody different than who I really am. You could be anybody here.
Yes. I love, and that's that playful energy. So I said earlier, like when I was talking about the 6 of Swords, I had pulled 3 cards to guide the episode. Like they hadn't come up yet, but I feel like that's almost Page of Swords energy. Like there's a playfulness about that, but a curiosity about, okay, I could make up. Like this person has no idea, and you're not harming anyone. Like you're just making up a story. Like, I am so-and-so and I do this and I'm going here. And, I wonder why sometimes it's almost easier for us to do in a playful sense. We're not committing to it, versus what stops us from getting to this point in our life when we say, well, that's who I want to be. Well, okay, what do I need to do to get that?
And moving through the world as if it's real. Like I sometimes play a game with myself where I'll order coffee at Starbucks as someone else. Like I'm not saying I'm anybody else, but I'll go in and I'm like, I'm a famous movie star, let's say. So I'm going to order my 1 pump sugar-free cinnamon dolce soy latte differently than if I go in, as an exhausted business owner,
My brother-in-law does that or used to do it, where he would just like go in and use a different name.
Right.
And I feel like just even this, I almost want to say like act of defiance, but like it's like an act of defiance against like what like we feel like we're supposed to be doing, but it's not harming anyone. And I feel like that's that page energy of playfulness. And it's really it's a thought exercise, right? Like, what do I want to do? Who do I want to be? Like, how can I switch things up in my life so that I have a little bit of creative inspiration so that I can maybe know exactly like, or at least have a path of what I want to do moving forward. So I can not feel like I'm just kind of like, well, now I just sit here because I've checked off all these boxes, or I've done all this self-inquiry and I know who I am. And, I've reached this 10 of Cups moment. Now it's time to play.
Right. It is a thought exercise, and in a way, that is what the tarot can be.
Yes, absolutely.
It can be like, okay, well, let's play with the images here. What does this mean for me? What does it stimulate? What is it, what do we project onto it that we could then introject back, into our way of being in the world. Yes, I love a good thought exercise.
Absolutely.
That's for sure.
Yeah. I mean, and that's like, coming at tarot through a secular lens. I always try to tell folks, like, that's how I explain it to my clients. I say, this is a thought exercise. Think about when you walk into a museum and you see art on the walls, you're having an experience, you're having thoughts, you're having stuff come to you. It's the same with tarot.
Yeah, it is the same.
So one of the other cards, the final card I pulled to guide the episode is actually the Magician. And I know, I'm so excited. I'm glad I pulled this card. And I honestly feel like it's a great way to almost begin wrapping up the discussion because, the Magician is this beautiful archetype of this inner empowerment and this like learning and mastering of the skills based on the tools that you have in front of you. And I feel like when I think of the tools in front of the Magician, I very much apply them to, things that were maybe gifted to you or that you learned or forged with mentors or friends or people who kind of got you to where you are.
Yeah.
And, this sense of magic that exists in this card, I feel like we often don't pay attention to, okay, well, what actually is magic? What does it mean to embody the energy of the Magician? And I think, you would probably say something like magic is literally writing a story. It's creating a character. It's being at the airport and coming up with a whole different persona. It's, baking a cake or, making, a piece of art. But I feel like.
Love that.
Yeah, I feel like this is a beautiful archetype to just kind of wrap up with and really talk about how, our kind of life experience gets us to the point where, we do get to be the Magician and we realize, oh, we've been the Magician all along, but then I feel like we fully embody it, once we maybe hit that midlife point.
Yeah, I love that. I keep thinking as you're talking of I can't remember whose quote it is, but that everything is created twice, first in the imagination and then in the world.
Right.
That there's nothing that hasn't been imagined before it came to be. And that when you hit a point in your life where you don't know what there is to create next, the only thing to do really is to sit still and wait until the imagination gives you its next set of directions.
Absolutely. I feel like, oh my gosh, that's so beautiful. I just want to sit with that sentiment for a minute. And I feel like that truly embodies probably how you function within the realm of being a teacher now. And this project you have where you help guide people to, tell their own stories. And I would love for you to spend some time talking about that because I feel like it really kind of blends in nicely with our conversation about talking about, our identity and our different parts, because what you're doing is allowing people to almost be the Magician in their own life by owning and telling their stories.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think, where I went after doing therapy is to bring all of my selves together. So I had the work as a therapist. I had been a teacher before that, and I'm a marathon runner. And so as a marathon runner, the one thing that you really learn is endurance.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a good marathon runner, unless anybody's impressed. I'm a slow marathon runner, but I'm tenacious. And so, like, pulling all of those sets of skills together, I wanted to create a way for people who know they have a story to tell to be able to tell it and to get it done, because the manager parts stop people from not just from writing books, but from noticing their own transformation. So, most of my writers who come to me, they are memoir writers. Some are fiction writers, but most are memoir writers. They've been through something hard. It's very much aligned with what we've been talking about.
Mm-hmm.
They've been through something hard or interesting, and they're trying to make sense of it. They're trying to figure out, what is the arc of this journey? I think about the 10 of Cups again. There's this arc,
Right.
And so we help them dig deep and find what is the arc of your story, because if you can find that in your own story, then that is your legacy. Like, that is what you get to leave for other people. The earned wisdom that if we can articulate it, we then place it in the collective consciousness. So to me, that just feels like the mission that I'm on, is to contribute to the collective consciousness in a conscious way. Like, not just, we all have our stories like rattling around in our head, but like, what is the arc from that was hard to I'm a badass, So that's what we do. We have a 9-month writing program that helps people figure that out, and then we give them tools like the magician's tools. We always say that there's 4 pillars, and it's interesting. There's 4 elements here, 4 pillars to successful completion. And I never thought till this very moment that they probably align with the suits. I'm going to think about that. Yeah.
That is so cool. Can you tell folks where they can find you and join your project?
Yeah. So my website is thenarrativeproject.net. There is a .org out there. So this is .net. And by the way, too, we have a really fun quiz on the website, like, what is your inner critic? Because, the Richard Schwartz and Jay Early, they have like the 7 different kinds of critics,
right.
The molder, the perfectionist. So we have a little quiz on the website where people can, find out like which ones are really up for you.
Oh, nice.
So that's fun. So it's just thenarrativeproject.net. And we're happy to mastermind any story with somebody who thinks they have one.
People are lucky to have you. And I love what you're doing. And I love the lives that you've lived so far. And I feel grateful to know you now. And I'm excited to see what lives you'll live, even like post this one.
Oh, thank you. It's been so fun to talk, because I've been listening to you, for months and months. And it's just great to have a chance to have a conversation with you, Shannon. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to The Tarot Diagnosis. You can follow us on Instagram and TikTok under the handle @TheTarotDiagnosis, and join us while we pull daily cards and explore tarot and mental health in between podcast episodes. You can also subscribe to our podcast to make sure that you never miss an episode. If you have a topic or question that you'd like for us to explore on the podcast, you can contact us directly on our website, www.thetarotdiagnosis.com.